Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wasalam ala rasulih al-kareem. My name is Lubabah Abdullah. I apologize for not being able to hear me. I plugged in my microphone and didn't actually put it into my ears while I was getting prepared. So what I was talking about is what we're going to be talking about today is the importance of having the Islamic will, the requirements of an Islamic will, and then why we need to have one as Americans living here in Texas. So what are those consequences? And then we'll touch base, if we have time, on the importance of awqaf, our endowments, which have historically been used to support all of our Islamic institutions and our Islamic masajid and schools. So, inheritance law is called ilm al-fara'id in Arabic. It's the knowledge of fard, of things that are fard. So, fara'id, it's the subject of injunctions concerning inheritance. It involves knowing the rules for dividing the inheritance and distributing it so that each heir receives his or her proper share. It was called the knowledge of fara'id or ilm al-fara'id because it's half of the knowledge that we all have to have because it affects all people. We were told in the Quran, we're told in Surah Al-Baqarah, one of the first verses that came down regarding inheritance, that كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمْ إِذَا حَضَرَ أَحَدُكُمُ الْمَوْتِ أَنْ تَرِكَ خَيْرًا الْوَصِيَّةَ لِلْوَالِدَيْنِ وَالْأَقْرَبِينَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ حَقًّا عَلَى الْمُتَّقِينَ. It is prescribed for you when death approaches any of you, if he leaves wealth, that he makes a bequest to parents and next of kin according to reasonable manners. And this is a duty of al-muttaqun, of the pious. So this was a definite command that we were given. Again, before the actual ayahs in Surah An-Nisa came down saying who gets what, that verse came down saying, if you have something, make sure you're giving it to your family. Make sure that you're taking care of them. The other ayah that came down in Surah Al-Baqarah as well, that talks about this, talks about if the disaster of death should strike you, then make sure, and you're traveling through the land and disaster of death strikes you, then make sure that you write out your wasiyah and that you should have 2 witnesses, and those witnesses should both swear by Allah that we will not exchange our oath for a price, even if he should be a near relative, and we will not withhold the testimony of Allah. Indeed, we would then be sinful. So even in Islamic law, I know we'll talk a little bit more about Texas law and Missouri law, that you have to have witnesses for a will. But even under Islamic law, Allah tells us in the Quran, you have to have your 2 witnesses, and they have to make an oath stating that they will not withhold their testimony, they will not change it, or else they would be from the sinners. Again, there are numerous hadiths that talk about the importance of having a will. One of the hadiths from Sahih Bukhari, he talks about it is the duty of a Muslim who has anything to bequest to not let 2 nights pass without writing a will about it. So if you have any assets, it is fard upon you to write a will within 2 nights of having that asset. The other hadith that I'll talk about before we go into the verses is narrated in Ahmad and Ibn Majah, where if a man may do good deeds for 70 years, but if he acts unjustly when he leaves his last testament, the wickedness of his deed will be sealed upon him and he will enter the fire. If, on the other hand, a man acts wickedly for 70 years, but is just in his last will and testament, the goodness of his deed will be sealed upon him and he will enter the garden. So subhanAllah, Allah tells us, and the Prophet ﷺ tell us that if you do good deeds for 70 years, but then you are unjust when you leave your inheritance, when you leave your will for your survivors, that wickedness will be enough to seal upon you and enter you into the fire, even if you had been righteous and did good deeds for those 70 years. And on the converse, if you do evil for those 70 years, and then you, in your last will and testament, you are just, then the goodness of that deed will be sealed and he will enter Jannah, he will enter the garden of paradise. Abu Hurairah also told us that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace be upon him, said, "The best type of charity is that which you give when you are healthy and short of funds, fearing poverty and hoping for wealth. Do not postpone it till when your soul reaches your throat and you say, 'Give so much to so and so much to so and so.' Verily, by then, so and so had already gotten so much." So we know as Muslims that our rizq, that our sustenance has already been decreed by Allah. Allah decreed all of our sustenance for us, for our children, for everyone, whether it's food, whether it's shelter, whether it's money, right? These are all things that Allah has already decreed. And so this hadith tells you this, that the best type of charity, especially right now when we are all in our homes, we are not able to meet in public, we're not able to have this gathering in a masjid, we're at home and we're each doing this individually. The best type of charity is that when you are healthy and short of funds, fearing poverty and hoping for wealth. So right now we're in that situation. So do not postpone it till when death approaches you. If you have assets, if you have charity, please give it now, because that is from our sunnah. The last hadith that I'll talk about is where a man who freed 6 slaves on his deathbed, and that was his entire estate. So he was on his deathbed. He wanted to do something good. So he was like, I'm going to free all of my slaves and have that be as a sadaqah for me. The wife went to the Rasul and asked him, she's like, Ya Rasulullah, my husband had his whole estate were these 6 slaves. And on his deathbed, he has freed them all. Is that okay? Is that just? The Rasul said no. And he took the slaves and he put them in groups of 2. So he made groups of 1/3. So 1/3 he freed. So 1/3 of his estate was freed, and then the other 2/3 stayed with the family. So again, when we have a will, first off, what we've learned so far is that it's fard upon us to have a will. So we have to have a will, and you have to be truthful and fair in leaving your estate towards your parents and your family. And living here in America, where we have intestacy laws, and intestacy laws are if someone dies without a will, each state has created their own statutes that dictate who gets your assets, who gets your wealth. And of course, those intestacy laws are not in, they're not equal to Islamic law. They are not the same as Islamic law. So it makes it a fard, or an obligation on Muslims to have a written will. So again, we're going into the verses now, and the verses that were revealed regarding Islamic law, like the actual law, there are only 3 verses, and they are all in Surah An-Nisa. The first one talks about للرجال نصيب مما ترك الوالدين والأقربون وللنساء نصيب مما ترك الوالدين والأقربون مما قل منه أو كثر نصيبا مفروضا. For men is a share of what parents and close relatives leave, and for women is a share of what parents and close relatives leave. Be it little or much, it's an obligatory share. So keep in mind that when the Quran was revealed, women were seen as property. They were seen as chattel. They were seen as something to be inherited. There are, when we study the seerah, and we study the hadith, and we study prior to Islam coming in, men used to literally take their cloak and throw it on the widow of his brother to indicate that she became his property. Islam came, and what Islam said is that for men and for women, you get a share of inheritance. So it lifted women out of the status of being property to being able to own property, being able to control their own property, control their own wealth. And so it is, the other thing that we learn from this verse is that it's prohibited to change the ordained shares or use the will as a means of causing harm or suppression. So who inherits under Islamic law? Under Islamic law, you have to have a relationship, either through blood or through marriage. So through marriage, it would just be the wife and the husband. Um, Through blood, it would be the children, the grandchildren, the great grandchildren, and other descendants. Through the parents, both mother and father, and their ascendants, so grandmother, great grandmother, father, grandfather, and great grandfather. Um, and then aunts and uncles, sisters and brothers, half and full, and cousins. Yes. Sorry, I've got the kids are home with me. So who does not inherit? Non-Muslims do not inherit. An apostate does not inherit. Someone who kills either directly or indirectly, someone who he inherits from does not inherit. And then people who die simultaneously, like a family in a car accident, and there's no way to determine who died first. So what you can do is that you can leave a wasiyah for the non-Muslim. So what does that mean? So with us, you have your estate as a whole, it's 100%. Up to 33% of it, you can leave for um, for anyone else. You can leave it for sadaqah, you can leave it for a charity that you like, you can leave it for, cousins, or for a friend, or for a relative, or someone else who you know who needs it. You can leave up to 1/3 of your estate there. But again, I cannot overemphasize that we're told not to postpone the good of deeds. So if you have money, give now. You can set up an endowment, or you can set up a sadaqah jariyah, a running charity, and that will all benefit you later on, inshallah. So up to 1/3 of your estate can be given to charity, or those who are not provided for as heirs under Islamic law, so a non-Muslim wife or non-Muslim parents, adopted children, any special needs children, or anyone else for good. Inheritance is a means that Allah has made for supporting one's nearest family, and one should not rob them of this opportunity or cause them to fall into poverty. Like the man that we talked about earlier, when he freed his entire estate, it was from a good place that he wanted to free them, but it would cause his family to fall into poverty. And that's not what the purpose is of Islamic law. So again, the three verses that lay down the actual rulings. The first one talks about, this is from Surah An-Nisa. If you guys have a Quran and you want to open it so you can go along with us, we're in Surah An-Nisa, verse 11. Allah instructs you concerning your children. For the male, what is equal to the share of 2 females. But if there are only daughters, 2 or more, for them is 2/3 of one estate. If there is only one, for her is half. And for one's parents, to each of them is a sixth of his estate if he left children. But if he had no children and the parents alone inherit from him, then for his mother is 1/3. And if he had brothers or sisters, for his mother is a sixth, after any bequest he may have made or debt. Your parents or your children, you know not which of them are nearest to you in benefit. These shares are an obligation imposed by Allah. Indeed, Allah is ever knowing and wise. So with regards to children, the son gets double what the daughters get. If there are daughters, one daughter gets half of the estate, and 2 or more share in 2/3 of the estate. For parents, if the deceased left children, the mom and dad get the same amount. They each receive 1/6 of the estate. If there are no children, then mom gets 1/3 and dad receives the rest. If the deceased has brothers and sisters, mom gets 1/6 and dad gets the rest, and the siblings do not inherit. And the reason the siblings do not inherit is that they inherit from the parents. So mom and dad will be able to use the funds while they're alive, and then once they die, that money will go to the siblings. A lot of people question why the son gets double what daughters get. And what I always tell people, and even my kids are 12 and 8, and they have heard me say this to them many, many times, is that on the son is an obligation, a religious obligation to provide for his sister. to provide for the women in his family, to provide for his mom if she doesn't have anyone else to provide for her, to provide for, any of his sisters, for any of his nieces. That is a religious obligation that he will be asked by God. And so my problem isn't, so I am totally, I enjoy the fact that sons get double what daughters get. But that also comes a great responsibility for us as parents to make sure that we raise our sons where they feel the importance of this and that they take this upon them for not just while we're alive, but for the rest of their lives, as well as teaching it to their offspring. That this is a religious obligation. This is a privilege that you get, but with that comes a huge responsibility. This ayah closes with, your parents or your children, you know not which of them are nearest to you in benefit. These shares are an obligation imposed by Allah. Indeed, Allah is ever knowing and wise. So we might want to favor one child over another. We might have one child who has lived with us for longer and takes care of us more than the rest of the siblings. And we know that, and that's okay. But what we don't know is what happens after your death. One of the things, three things follow you after you die. And those are, one of them is a continuous charity, a sadaqah jariyah, a continuous or a running charity, knowledge that others benefit from, and a righteous child who makes dua for you. So that child who might be driving you insane right now might grow up to be that child that actually makes righteous dua for you. And so because you don't know that, because it's all in Allah's hands, Allah tells us, you don't know what's going to be better for you, but these are my laws, and I am ever knowing and wise, Allah tells us. And so we follow these shares, we give these shares as an obligation that was imposed by him. The next verse talks about husbands and wives and parents again. And what this verse says, and I'll read the translation again. And for you is half of what your wives leave if they have no child. But if they have a child, for you is 1/4 of what they leave after any bequest they may have made or debt. And for the wives is 1/4 if you leave no child. But if you leave a child, then for them is 1/8 of what you leave after any bequest you may have made or debt. And if a man or woman leaves neither ascendants nor descendants, but has a brother or a sister, then for each of them is 1/6. But if they are more than two, they share 1/3, after any bequest which was made or debt, as long as there is no detriment caused. This is an ordinance from Allah, and Allah is knowing, forbearing. So the husband will get 1/2 of the estate of his wife if she has no children. If the wife has any children, even from a previous marriage, then the husband only gets 1/4 of her estate. For the wife, she gets 1/4 of the estate if the husband has no children. And if the husband has children, then she gets half of that, or 1/8 of the estate. If there are co-wives, then they share in that 1/4 or that 1/8. The verse goes on to talk about kalala. A kalala is someone a deceased who leaves no ascendants, so he has no parents, no grandparents going on up, and there are no descendants, no kids, no grandkids going on down, but he has brothers or sisters. If they are a kalala, then each of the siblings receives, if there are two siblings, then they each receive 1/6 of the estate. If they are more than that, then they share in 1/3. This ayah again talks about, finishes off by talking about that after any bequest made or debt. So these shares are split after any bequest or any debt is made, as long as there is no detriment caused, and that this is an ordinance from Allah, and Allah is knowing and forbearing. So He is aware. I'm going to skip over to the last ayah of verse 176 of Surah An-Nisa, because it talks again about kalala, about people who do not have any ascendants or descendants. This was actually Umar radiallahu anhu mentioned that that the kalala, the person who has no ascendant nor descendants, is the hardest part of Islamic law, that he struggled with the most. So in this ayah, they say, and again, the Quran, when it was revealed, it was a dialogue, right? So the people would come, the Sahaba would come to the Rasul, and or a situation would happen, and they would come and they would ask him a question, and then verses from the Quran would be revealed in answering of those questions. So this verse starts off, they request from you a legal ruling. Say, Allah gives you a ruling concerning one having neither descendants nor ascendants as heirs. If a man dies, leaving no child, but only a sister, she will have half of what he left, and he inherits from her if she dies and has no child. But if there are two sisters or more, they will have 2/3 of what he left. If there are both brothers and sisters, the male will have the share of two females. Allah makes clear to you his law, lest you go astray, and Allah is knowing of all things. So again, this verse again speaks more about the kalala, the person who has no ascendants and descendants. So if a man dies leaving only one sister, she receives half of his estate. If there are two or more sisters, then they receive 2/3 of the estate. If they are both brothers and sisters, then the sister receives 1/2 of the brother's share. And if a woman dies leaving only brothers, he inherits everything. Again, if she dies and she leaves both brothers and sisters, then each sister receives half of a brother's share. Allah makes, and then he finishes the verse, Allah makes clear to you his law, lest you go astray. And Allah is knowing of all things. So going back to ayah 13 of Surah An-Nisa, Allah finishes off these rulings. So these are all of the verses that have to do with inheritance laws. That's it. Those are the 3 verses in the Quran that deal with who gets actually what. Allah finishes those ayahs by talking about these are the limits set by Allah. Tilka hududullah. These are the limits set by Allah, and whoever obeys Allah and His Messenger will be admitted by Him to gardens in paradise, under which rivers flow, abiding eternally therein, and that is the great attainment. May Allah make us of those. And then the next one talks about, and what وَمَنْ يَعْصِ اللَّهَ, and whoever disobeys Allah and His Messenger and transgresses His limits, He will put him into the fire to abide eternally therein, and he will have a humiliating punishment. One thing that you'll see that was repeated 4 times in the 2 verses of Surah An-Nisa talks about after any bequest he may have made or debt. And this is, like I said, mentioned 4 times, and it stresses the importance of filling the deceased wasiyas and paying their debts. Even though when the deceased passes, you pay debts first. But the scholars say that the wasiyah is mentioned first to stress its importance with Allah, even though debts are, again, paid first. So again, Islamically, what happens when you die? So the first thing is anything that's borrowed gets returned to the rightful owners. What happens when you die with regards to your asset, with regards to your estate? So the first thing is anything that's borrowed gets returned to its rightful owner. Any burial expenses come out of the estate. Any debts to people are paid. Any debts to Allah. So if you have kafara, if you have days that you fasted that you have not fasted, if you did not go to Hajj even though you were able to go and you had the means financially and physically to go, if you haven't paid zakat, those are debts to Allah. And under the Hanafi and Maliki, they say pay this if it is written in the wasiyah and only up to 1/3 of the estate. And that again comes out of that 1/3 of the estate. And after that, any wasiyah, any specific bequests that have been made up to 1/3 of the estate get distributed. And then after that, you distribute the rest of the assets. Under Texas law, if you have a will or if you don't have a will, Probate is the legal process where a court determines if a will is valid and distributes a person's property if he or she dies without a will. So they appoint an executor, they find any creditors or pay any debts, they pay any income and estate taxes, and then they distribute the assets. Some things to consider when you are creating a will. So when well, we've been talking about an estate. And so I wanted to answer the question, what is an estate? So an estate is the total of a person's property, entitlements, and obligations. It's all of your real property, like your land, your house, your anything else that cannot move. It's any of your personal property. And personal property is any property that is movable property. So cars, cash, jewelry, artwork, securities in stock, any copyrights, patents, trademarks, goodwill, those are all personal property. Real property is land and things that are permanently attached to the land, such as trees, buildings, and stationary mobile homes. So an estate is a collective name for everything you own at the time of your death. Some things to consider now that we've talked about sort of what a will is making a will, considering a trust. And all that a trust is a legal fiction. It is a box that you take all of your assets and you title them in the name of the trust. And the trust, for example, my trust is called the Abdullah Family Revocable Living Trust. And so I have titled all of my assets in the name of this trust, and they are held into this artificial box. And the trust documents, they detail out what happens to all of my assets when I die, or even if I'm incapacitated. The trust will detail out who do I want to take care of my assets, where do I want my assets to go, what sort of requirements are there before my assets go to my children? How old do they need to be before they can have access to it? The other thing to consider is making a healthcare directive. And a healthcare directive or a power of attorney for healthcare dictates what happens if you are sick and you cannot make medical decisions for yourself. Who do you want to make decisions for you? And then if those people are not available, then what decisions do you want them to make for you? Do you want to be on a ventilator? Do you want CPR? Do you want to have a feeding tube? Do you want any and all interventions, or do you want none? Do you want to just be let go? So that's what the benefit of a healthcare directive is. The next document is making a financial power of attorney. The financial power of attorney is a document that dictates, again, same thing. If you are incapacitated, who do you want to make financial decisions for you? And how much authority do you want to give them to make those decisions for your financial? The last thing is children. With children, you have to decide who is going to be a guardian for your kids. And that is something that is really important and something that many of us shy away from because it's a difficult conversation to have. We shy away from having a will or going through estate planning because it is difficult, because it makes us think of our own mortality and knowing that we are, Allahu alam, only Allah knows when our time is going to go. And so we have to make sure at the very least that our kids are taken care of and that the person who has access to them, the person who's going to raise them for us, has to be who we want. And one of the benefits of a will is that is one of the only places where you can list out who you want as a guardian. Other considerations as you talk to an attorney or as you think about this process for yourself is thinking about life insurance, understanding any tax consequences, covering any funeral expenses or final arrangements, and then also having long-term care. You know, what happens if you are unable to take care of yourself and you need to be in a nursing home for the long term? A will has to be in writing and you have to follow all the proper steps under the law. One of the things that I do want to talk about that is I am an attorney and I am a licensed attorney in Missouri. I am not licensed here in Texas, so I cannot give any legal advice here. But one thing that I do want to let you know is that in order to have a valid, that there is a type of valid will that you can write at home. It's called a holographic will. And what that will does is it is a fully handwritten will that is signed by you. That is something that you can use as a stopgap between now and whenever you can get in to see an attorney or whenever you can get in to create your will or create your trust. So a holographic will is something that each of us can do, and all it is a handwritten document that has to be signed by you stating this is my holographic will and I want to leave my assets to 1, 2, 3, 4. I want to have these people have guardianship of my children. With that, I am going to the requirements to talk about the requirements to create a valid will in Texas, and then after that, I will wrap up and ask if you guys have any questions. To create a valid will in Texas, a person has to have sound mind, who's at least 18 years old. It must be in writing. It must be signed by the testator or at their direction, and it has to be attested, witnessed by at least 2 competent witnesses, at least 14 years of age, who sign the will in the presence of each other and in the presence of the testator. You cannot strike out any portions of this document. Again, this has to be signed by the testator and have 2 witnesses. This is different from the holographic will, where you can just handwrite a will and leave it and handwrite a will with all in writing that this is my will, and you sign it at the end. You do not need witnesses for that. But that is a stopgap option until, like I said, you can get in to go and see someone. So with that, I will close. Are there any questions? Okay, with that, I will close. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. My name is Lubabah Abdullah, and I am the Executive Director of CAIR Texas Houston. You can join us on our website. There is a form there to get more information. You can call us on our office line. They are all being routed over to our cell phones here at home. And so we will, inshallah, or you can send us an email. My email is ed@cair, CAIR, hyphen Houston.com. Inshallah. Jazakum Allahu khair. With everything that is going on, can the witnesses be Zoom witnesses? Probably not. I doubt it. Again, I'm not licensed here in Texas, so I cannot answer that definitively. But from what I've seen in Missouri, I don't think that you can have witnesses by Zoom. But you can, again, be creative with regards to how you get your witnesses. If you work with an attorney, you can work with them on, there are notaries that, I know in Missouri, we have notaries that travel, that are willing to come to your house to become a notary, to notarize. So potentially you set up a table outside and you have the will ready and your witnesses come and you all quickly sign and leave, each of you having your own sanitized pen, and just sign and leave. So there are ways to get around it, but we can talk more about that. But I do not believe that a witness on Zoom is going to be enough at this point in time. But Allahu Alam, and the laws definitely change. Sister Shema, you asked me, repeat please about the man who have healthy parents. What are you asking for? We are just waiting for this last question, the clarification for this question, and then inshallah we'll close. Sorry, I wrote down some questions for you guys to poll and I wasn't able to, I forgot to poll them. So do you have a will or trust? If you could take a few seconds and just let us know. So I think if I understand your question correctly, Sister Shema, is that it is fard upon everyone to leave a will. And our hadith tells us that you have 2 nights. If you have any estate, if you have any wealth for 2 nights, you have to create a will. Um, and um, so that is what that is. And then with that, under Islamic law, um, a person's estate is something that is mandated from Allah, and it's something that even if we do not agree with it, it is something that Allah has ordained, that we have to give the estate with in the way that Allah has ordained it. Um, Inshallah, if there are no other questions, I will go ahead and close. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. We are available to you at any point in time. Jazakumullah khair for joining us this morning, and we will talk soon. Assalamu alaikum. Please remember to stay safe and healthy and social distance, and practice all the best hygiene practices, inshallah, so that we can continue to actually leave our houses and actually come meet with you guys in person, inshallah. Again, feel free to call, text, email, and we love to hear from you guys and talk to you guys. Assalamu alaikum.